Well, Mountaineer Nation, we got ourselves a men's basketball coach. Are you happy? Are you sad? Or are you somewhere in between? Love to know your comments. Leave them here on YouTube. I'm Carson Fox for Fox on West Virginia Mountaineer Sports, and I really appreciate you tuning in. I know another very bland backdrop for you here, so in the process of trying to redesign my little office studio, so hopefully it starts to come together here in the next several videos that you see here over spring and summer. But let's get to the important stuff. West Virginia, earlier this afternoon, I love the language surrounding this, was targeting North Texas's Ross Hodge to become the Mountaineers' next head basketball coach, reported around many different national and local media members before the news became official, announced on social media later. And why I say that's funny is because I feel like targeting is the new buzzword in the media for teams hiring coaches who are currently under contract with other teams before that team makes it official. So it was West Virginia was targeting, and then it finally happened. So before I talk about the actual Hodges hiring and the ramifications from that, I want to just start off today's show with a bit of additional thoughts on the Darian DeVries departure, then the other reported head coaching candidates between the 9-day span from when DeVries' hiring at Indiana was announced to today, and then what this hiring means for West Virginia moving forward. So let's talk about this whole search, kind of wrapping up where we ended the last video to today. I'd listened to a whole bunch of podcasts in between then and today to kind of crystallize my thoughts on the Darian DeVries departure. I didn't want to get so much wrapped up into the news of the coaching search because it is kind of secondhand. I'm not a 247 sports like message board premium account holder or anything like that to understand the news, but we know who the good reporting is done by in the WVU and also national landscape of where it was going, and some of the people, if you read between the lines of who West Virginia was looking at. So then we can kind of talk about, I feel like, big picture of what this means specifically for Hodge and then for West Virginia. So some additional context I want to add to the Darian DeVries departure, because in the last video that I made 9 days ago, didn't have the full picture. You were kind of getting my initial reactions. A lot of that was still boiled in with West Virginia not being included as part of this year's NCAA tournament. And I think I was, like most Mountaineer fans, very heated, and then that just, in a very Rich Rodriguez 2007-like mode, it felt as if DeVries was just exiting Morgantown deceitfully in the night. And I think like that there's part of it. Was DeVries in talks with Iowa well before the end of the regular season? I don't know. I think, for one, in trying to tie this in with the Tucker perhaps injury situation that may have not been an injury, I don't know about that. What does it say potentially about Indiana coming off that Bahamas tournament, whether or not they were 75% of the way there or more with ousting Mike Woodson as head coach, to turn on a dime from one performance by a brand new Power 4 coach who's in the first 10 games of his career at West Virginia, to say that's our guy, that's who we want, and then to make this elaborate offer in the Bahamas in secret, and him thinking in collaboration with his son, I want you to sit out this year so that we can retain your extra year's worth of eligibility and move on next season. I don't think it happened so early as that. I think I can agree with where Tony Caridi and Brad Howe were saying on that they don't think that was any sort of a coordinated effort. Because I don't think that these things move that quickly. Indiana had such a change of a heart. Otherwise, they would have done it previously before West Virginia hired Darian DeVries. I think it came later. I think their idea that they wanted Darian DeVries and Tucker, by association, crystallized during that tournament, and then it took a couple of months to feel it out, probably talk to some mega boosters, understanding his buyout, knowing that this is and then also seeing how football did, going to the college football playoffs. Like I said after the last video, that there was, I feel like in Bloomington, a lot of momentum and a lot of passion, and some people stepped up to the plate here to said, we want to be players in football and basketball in this new world of college sports, and let's go do it. So Indiana feeling as if they know who the guy that they want to go get. Can we raise the money? If that offer came in early February, which is where I would presume it probably took place, shortly thereafter the Iowa State win at home, maybe is where it's the idea was, or some numbers were floated out there to DeVries' agent. But I do think that the DeVries and Tucker's injury was real. That I think, and it might be so debilitating that, it's something now chronic at this point that may hold him back from a NBA career, and he might just have one more year left in college basketball and may never be the same player that he was prior to coming to West Virginia when he had surgery and then re-injured it. So I don't know. I think that might be a little bit of a stretch, but I think there is all the evidence, and it was admitted by DeVries himself during his initial press conference in saying that, like, this is the place that I wanted to be. I think all along previously at Drake, he had the idea in his head. He's a Gen Xer growing up in the Midwest who, as a lot of people were reporting, that he was going to take the Iowa job being an in-state guy, by passing on them for the bigger quote-unquote opportunity in Indiana. So this wasn't anything I would say on West Virginia's part, as I think that DeVries was entertained by this idea by a program that he held in the highest esteem as a blue blood or a former, I still think is a has-been program, but a former blue blood of college basketball from the Midwest where he's from, that he could resurrect and be paid as one of the highest paid coaches in college basketball. So it all came together. I don't like the fact that he wasn't going to entertain the idea of a counter offer from West Virginia. I think that Wren Baker was going to go out there and make a strong offer, as he said in his press conference. Had some donor support, wanted to contribute it, back to Darian DeVries and upgrade into the program, everything, give him the resources that he wanted. But that DeVries just ultimately said no. That didn't matter what West Virginia was going to offer. So with that, no public signs of gratitude on his way out the door. Thank you, West Virginia, even if it's just empty words. And then not communicate to his assistants, to the players. Just, again, leave in the dead of night. I'm out the door. And what are you going to do? Like, you can criticize him for being so happy at Indiana, whereas if he looks still like a stone, a statue whenever he was during his time in Morgantown. But I all bottled up in one. I'm not going to necessarily criticize the move that DeVries made, but the way he handled it, that's where I, as a West Virginia fan, am not happy. I don't. So now DeVries is going to be personified in the same kind of air as Rich Rodriguez 1.0. And that's kind of like good riddance. Don't let the door hit you whenever it's on your way out. But I'm not going to stand down from my take. And this is kind of, I'm going to wrap this video up at the end about that this is an example of a Big Ten, also a SEC school. Like I said I can wrap them up together as one group, as the new Power 2 of college sports. It's evident that this was them flexing their muscles, going out there, paying top dollar. That if you listen to Wren Baker and how truthfully and honest that he was in his press conference after DeVries left for Indiana and talking about the search, he always references where West Virginia is in terms of the Big 12 in revenue, NIL dollars. He even said, I think in that press conference, talking about where Kentucky is. So Kentucky is a state that has to support two Power 4 programs, one in Louisville, one in Kentucky. University of, state that has over twice the population of West Virginia. But I don't see them as so totally ideologically, culturally, all of that different. But him saying that Kentucky is about 4 times that of what West Virginia is, whoa, we need to back up here. So I'm going to put a pin in that and come back to that, wrapping this up in totality. What I want to move into is why I think this was not the cycle to lose a coach. And it really comes down to, I think that there were really 2 big ticket, if you want to call that, coaches available as part of this cycle. And that was Will Wade and Ben McCollum. Will Wade obviously had great success at Louisiana State when Ben, the point guard from the Philadelphia 76ers, anyway, I forget who was there, ended up getting caught in the whole recruiting kind of scandal that was a part of that down there. That's now just, I feel like, commonplace in today's world of open NIL negotiations. So he gets the 2-year show cause penalty, kind of resurrects himself at McNeese State. I personally did not like the way that he handled the public negotiations and talking about how NC State was the school for him. I guess I respect the transparency, the open and honest, like where he's coming from, that, hey, this is what I'm going to do. I'd rather that than someone lie to me, but I just feel as if it's a little bit unprofessional for the administration, for the fan base, boosters, and even honestly, the current players on the team and past players, to just say that, like, yes, I'm coaching here now and I'm going to be moving on to NC State no matter what, while your team is still actively playing in the tournament. And just equate that to professional terms. Yeah, I know that it's kind of like, it's not always an apples-to-apples situations of people being hired in different businesses, some people on a contract, or some people, you agree and accept a position, and you can be fired at any given point in time. So it's kind of hard to compare those things, but just when you're under contract with another school and say, yeah, I'm going somewhere else, I think it calls into question your motivation and integrity. About how you're going about your business with that current job. So you would rather just focus on the task at hand before you take that. So I'll get off my high horse and ranting off there. But Will Wade has the resume, record, wherewithal, but thinking, and he was too far down the line. So I don't even think he was considered as part of West Virginia's list, because he was so far down the rabbit hole already with NC State. What he announced that about taking the job at NC State, or that coming up, like right as the tournament was starting. So there was no way for West Virginia to even entertain Will Wade with the idea of coming here. Then it was Ben McCollum, who I think had it not in the same respects as DeVries, like a DeVries going to Indiana thing, but I think the writing was on the wall, that he was even closer, born and raised to the University of Iowa, coaching at Drake this season, coming up from the next level. And he was probably more affordable than what Iowa was willing to spend on DeVries. So I don't know if they were ever out on DeVries the entire time. That was just a smokescreen in the national reporting for several months. But it just seemed as if it was an obvious fit that McCollum wanted to go to Iowa. Though it sounded as if, I never checked Twitter so frequently about all these head coaching updates as I have in the last week. It just seemed like you check every single hour and some new piece of information was coming out. But it sounded like the deal to McCollum in Iowa happened early and then wasn't truly official for a longer period of time than when you thought would have been natural, so that maybe perhaps West Virginia jumped in there with an offer to him. I don't know that. I don't think any one of us will, unless some of the reporters come out with that, or somehow, some way it leaks out that West Virginia was trying to offer Ben McCollum, but he turned West Virginia down to take the Iowa job. But I just think that was probably too far down the road for McCollum to turn back. Wanted to go home, and he accepted the Iowa job. And I think the same very much can be said of Nico Medved at Colorado State and Minnesota, an alum. That I think that same difference. No matter how Colorado State did, I know was just a travel call away from Colorado State moving on to the Sweet 16 and not the twerps of Maryland. Goodness, I would have loved to see Maryland lose there. Really wanted to see that. But it just makes total sense then, in the same way of McCollum to Iowa, Medved going back to Minnesota. So I don't know how seriously or that those three coaches were taken. So that really leaves Jared Calhoun at Utah State. I think West Virginia could have afforded Jared Calhoun's buyout at Utah State, just 1 year there in Logan. Read an article from, I don't know if it was Salt Lake Times or something like that, late last week, and it's saying that Utah State had already extended an offer to Jared Calhoun. He's got 2 4-star recruits coming in. Like, they want to invest in him and the leader of the program, because Utah State's not a football power. So let's go into it in basketball. Guy from East Liverpool, Ohio, previous assistant under Bob Huggins. Think it made total sense, while maybe not perhaps the flashiest hire, but a guy who did it at the Division II level at Fairmont State, taking them to a Division II national championship game, resurrecting really Youngstown State into making them respectable during the time that he was there and leaving them in a real good place when he accepted the Utah State position, was probably part of the candidate pool down the list last year whenever Baker was going through and hiring DeVries. So you kind of thought that's really what I was thinking about coming on this past weekend and doing another video like this and saying I can really buy into the idea of Jared Calhoun, but just kind of wanted to wait on it because I really do think this came down finally to a Wren Baker decision. And that whether you believe in what you read on Twitter about he didn't interview very well, that Baker wanted to extend him the offer, or what I'm going to talk about with Hodge, is that Wren Baker, I think it was a decision on him to say, no, Jared Calhoun is not the right fit coach that I want to make this hire to. So that can be debated in the public sphere. I'm sure that will be kind of in the back of people's minds when evaluating Coach Hodge in the next year or two and seeing how Calhoun does at Utah State. Does he go somewhere during his time, and within this next 5-year extension, and how does he do? So that will always be debated about, I feel like, as part of the narrative around Coach Hodge and his now tenure is, could West Virginia have had Coach Calhoun? Then Richard Pitino saw some things on social media yesterday about flight patterns and Baker apparently being out in Albuquerque. So I just don't think Richard Pitino makes the right fit for a couple of reasons. One, he's Rick Pitino's son, and it's the wars of the old Big East. I feel like in Richard Pitino in the same way that I would about Shane Beamer at South Carolina for football, in that I'm sure it was talked about in that household how much that the Beamers hated West Virginia and the Patinos hated West Virginia. So I just have this feeling that Richard Pitino would have only been at West Virginia, just like DeVries, same kind of a stepping stone program somewhere else, because he would be using West Virginia to go elsewhere and try and cash in on an overpay day. And I think there was some reporting out there that he asked for a low buyout. West Virginia wanted a big buyout. They didn't come to terms, and that's why he's taking the Xavier job. So go for it, whatever. I know that New Mexico made the tournament, but he had a failed attempt at Minnesota previously. Maybe not just the right fit at the right time. Now he's had more years of experience doing it at a G6 program. Now he's ready to get back into the Power 5 of basketball, if you want to count the Big East, this new age Big East, as a power conference. So with that being said, it kind of came down to, I feel like Ross Hodge at North Texas or an internal hire in Chester Frazier. And if Wren Baker really wanted to do that, I don't think it would have taken this long. And that's why I think the announcement was today, because more time that passed with North Texas winning its game in the National Invitational Tournament last night over Oklahoma State, waiting on Ross Hodge and what North Texas does. Why does West Virginia have to wait on North Texas in the NIT? For goodness sakes, of all things, it's not like North Texas was in the NCAA tournament. If Baker wanted to be, classy and respect that his team, that Hodge is still coaching, I think that's why this decision was made now. Now here, 20 minutes in, I'm going to get to really my bold take of this entire video. This is my thesis to this entire hire, is I really do truly think that this was a hire by Wren Baker for not hiring Grant McCasland back in 2023. Now, you would have said to yourself, Carson, West Virginia had Bob Huggins under contract, the winningest active head coach in college basketball at that point in time. WVU legend. There's absolutely no way, shape, or form that West Virginia would have went to a Grant McCasland from North Texas at that point in time. Well, look at now Grant McCasland now. He was hired by Texas Tech just about a month before Bob Huggins, who I still love and still uphold like to this day, and won't say anything bad about him, but we'll say that was about a month or so before when Bob Huggins decided to pound a few too many back on a Monday afternoon and go on sports talk radio and call Xavier's fans some derogatory things I won't repeat for this video. And then another month or so away from that, in his DUI incident in Pittsburgh during a Taylor Swift concert. So I am very sure since that spring, early summer of 2023 that has eaten at Wren Baker since then. That he could have potentially had his guy from North Texas in Grant McCasland being the head basketball coach at West Virginia and where West Virginia would be today. So who's the best next thing? In the understudy and Ross Hodge. So to bring him on as the head coach of this program is, I think, a gamble in, a guy who's 43 years old, not from the state of West Virginia, Dallas, Texas. So he doesn't have any of those, homebound ties that, say, a Nico Venved got hired for or a Ben McCollum for, beyond being a good basketball coach. And he's young in terms of, and green in terms of head coaching experience, only 43 years old and only been the head coach at North Texas now in his second season, but been a long-term assistant. And that's where I'm going to talk about a lot of the positives for this video, because I think there does need to be some inspiration here out of Mountaineer Nation to try and accept where West Virginia is, but with some positivity and optimism. Because I thought for a very long time that West Virginia would very much mourn the day in which Bob Huggins was not the head coach of the Mountaineer basketball program. Didn't want to think about it. Wanted him to, go as far as he possibly could, like a Bobby Bowden or a Joe Paterno or Bob Knight or anyone like that, of try and hang in there and coach for as long as he possibly could at a high level. And I feared this day when West Virginia was not going to have that guy who would nose to the grindstone and had the chops of one of the best coaches in college basketball. Well, unfortunately for Huggins, I feel like that came a little earlier than what we expected. Ever since it just seemed like Javon Carter graduated and they lost that game to Villanova, West Virginia just couldn't reclaim the glory of those Press Virginia years. Then everything changed, I felt like, when Oscar Tshiebwe went to Kentucky, and then the 2020 happened, COVID, the transfer portal, NIL evolution, tried to reclaim. And I think more would have really been had out of that the group that had, if Deuce McBride wouldn't have went to the NBA early, if Derek Culver wouldn't have left without an extra year's worth of eligibility, right on the precipice of when West Virginia was getting everything organized with Country Roads Trust and being able to play. But so to potentially bring Bob Huggins back, I don't think that was ever an option. And I think part of the reason, trying to move ahead, new chapter, they kind of buried that whole era during the holdover year with Josh Eilert. That's why, maybe not the primary reason, but a secondary or tertiary reason why Jared Calhoun wasn't rehired. Was just to kind of create some distance between the university and Huggins and Wren Baker, and kind of just create this whole new era of Mountaineer basketball. And he's definitely doing so, I feel like. This is Wren Baker, that is, in this Ross Hodge hire. Now, I think there is a lot of, as I just mentioned a second ago, he cut his teeth as a mid-20-year-old, so a guy and myself who's just 31, I can really respect this, of what he was able to do as a mid-20-year-old JUCO head basketball coach, and putting together a 146-24 record with 2 conference titles, a JUCO national title appearance, and a Conference Coach of the Year honor at 2 different programs. So that's awesome. So good on Coach Hodge of being able to put that on in his early career. Then joined Southern Miss as an assistant, who won 25 games and made the NCAA tournament in 2011, 2012. Then 4 seasons as an assistant at Colorado State, who won 87 and 48 with 2 NCAA tournament appearances, including a win during that time against Missouri. Then became an associate head coach for Grant McCaslin at Arkansas State, who then brings him with him as the second in command, and ultimately gets a head coaching job after McCaslin left for Texas Tech. And then a team that got very injured, still had, what was his name? I think his last name was Edwards. Had that as part of my notes for today's show, and then I just lost it. The player that Jason Edwards, first team all-conference, 5th most points in a single game in program history, alongside scoring 650 points for the season. He was also a Joe B. Hall National Coach of the Year finalist. That's presented annually to the top rookie first-year head coach in Division I men's college basketball. This was a year ago. Edwards, as I mentioned, was first team All-American Conference and 6th Man of the Year. So, short period of time, 43 years old, has all these years as an assistant, and then this is what he's able to do. Year 1, year 2, they go 17-1 at home. They now have 27 wins, just 8 losses for the entire season. 14-4, that was second best in the American Athletic Conference behind Memphis, who made the NCAA tournament. Had wins non-conference at Minnesota, Oregon State. The downside is they didn't beat any NCAA tournament teams. 0-10 against them. 0-2 against top 25 competition. But what do they have, that in resources-wise that West Virginia can give him? And I think that's something that he appreciates, knowing nothing about him. But you would imagine a guy who's been cutting his teeth at the junior college level, I've said that phrase twice now, to try and go and find these diamonds that are, diamonds in the rough that are truly gems. And now he's going to come here with a $6 million buyout from Darian DeVries that can be invested into his contract. If they want to, increase the pay of Chester Frazier as a backup coach, I think that's something I'm going to be watching for. How much of the DeVries staff that might have just been turned off to the way that DeVries left wants to stick around and stay in Morgantown? Does that then keep Sincere Harris back within the program? Does that keep Amani Hansberry back in the program? Does that return Jonathan Powell back to the program? Who knows? I don't think we know those answers yet, but then it gives him an opportunity to go out there and spend in the portal. And this is something that I like about Hodge. Looking at North Texas's top 3 scorers from this season that's still going on for them. Leading scorer, guard Aiden Wright, transfer from Drake. Second leading scorer, forward Brennan Lorient, all eight American Conference first teamer, sixth man of the year, transfer from FAU. Third leading scorer, guard Jasper Floyd, transfer from Fairfield, former JUCO. So he proven track record that he can go out there and find some talent, mold them together, and win games. So, and I also like his attention to defense, just maybe not so much to the point that it's like, oh, here we go again. We're going to have a team that's all defense and no offense, like we had a lot of times throughout the Bob Huggins era. Stifling defense, amazing rebounding team, force teams to turn the ball over, Big East style defense, but can't hit a shot, and it looks like it's a bunch of five guys or four guys standing around in the corners not knowing what to do, and one guy with the ball who's holding onto the ball to the end of the shot clock and just throwing up a prayer. What I think I loved so much this year out of this team coached by Darian DeVries is how free-flowing they ran their offenses, the spacing, and also that there was this no excuses mentality. Yes, we truly don't have a starting center. We have limited forward depth, especially when Tucker DeVries wasn't there. But we're going to diversify our offense. We're going to shoot a whole bunch of threes at you. And if we hit them, we're going to win, and you're not going to stop us. And if we don't hit them, that's how we're going to lose. So I don't think you need to implement that exact same mold, but that's what I'm going to be looking for down the road out of Hodge. Not in the immediate term, but this upcoming season, and then from here on out, is what kind of offenses does he run? Can he develop guys like he did with Jason Edwards in his first year as head coach, Aiton Wright this past year, or current season at North Texas? Is what kind of an offensive skills coach? Can he use some of his assistant coaches in that regard, take some of the things that DeVries had as part of the system, mold it to his own? Because I'm very, very impressed of what I can read on paper out there about Hodge's defensive coaching prowess. I just want to see if that can translate to offense. And speaking of the things that are being said about him, wow. If you are a Fran Fraschilla fan, and it very much seems as if Fran is an ally of West Virginia, glowing things being said about him. Also, and most notably, obviously you would expect, is Grant McCasland in Texas Tech, probably the biggest supporter for Hodge to have him get this opportunity. But also Scott Drew at Baylor, Dusty May at Michigan, and then obviously a glowing report by Wren Baker. And even Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter, Grok, Earbeard really loved this tweet that you had earlier that he asked Grok what would he give. So artificial intelligence program gives it a B, and this is kind of where I stand by with it. So maybe not a home run hire like DeVries was, but he's a proven power four commodity. I wouldn't say power four commodity, but head coach, coaching commodity between his time as a JUCO head coach, and then FBS or whatever you would call it, Division I assistant, and now hire. His resume lacks the sizzle to immediately energize the fan base, and that's where I think maybe the majority of Mountaineer Nation sits right now. And obviously those top-tier teams that he didn't succeed against is, I wouldn't say a red flag, but something to be concerned about. But his defensive acumen, winning pedigree, Baker's endorsement suggests he has the tools to succeed. This feels like a high upside gamble, a hire based on potential, rather than proven dominance at this level. So that's kind of where I want to wrap with this show, is that sentence right there. This feels like a rather high upside gamble based upon potential rather than proven dominance at this level. And this is to the bigger point that I'll come back from what was pinned about from my last video, is that I think I've definitely come to this acceptance, but for those who, I don't know, are just caught up into this idea and like some of the things I think that were commented on by and into the Three Guys Before the Game podcast, is that when you say West Virginia is a top program, what do you mean? That's the question that I'll pitch back at at Mountaineer Nation? Do you think you're a top team in the Big 12? Do you think you're a top team in the country, top 10 team in the country? Because what I am arguing is that, unfortunately, is not possible because of the TV revenue sharing dollars that has now come down from ESPN and Fox to the Big Ten and the Power. We've been seeing this, y'all, I feel like for now 18 years. Ever since the day I feel like John Beilein took the job to Michigan, then Rich Rodriguez followed, that, and I don't want to sound disrespectful because, I think you have two sides of the coin here. You have, I forget his name, I think Drew from Locked On Big 12 listened to, and he gave a really glowing take, and I really appreciated that from him, talking about how Mountaineers need a winner, and like they should feel betrayed by Darian DeVries, and there will be better days ahead. And I appreciate that from guys like that, or Scott on ESPN at night talking about West Virginia like is a team that will stay up into the late hours of the night and be first up in the morning to support their team. And like, you can't kill West Virginia fans because we've been through a lot and have these scars that run deep, yet we always love our coach, or our program, and that is so true. That is absolutely so true. But again, the reality of the situation, and Baker, whenever I don't think that's something that I love so much about Wren Baker is you can tell that he comes from a place that he really truly cares. That I think that he has grabbed a hold of this state, of the Morgantown community, West Virginia University, everything, and he wants to champion this university because he believes in it, believes in the culture, the history, and he's bonded. Like, that's the thing. That's the thing that people don't understand about West Virginia unless you are a fan, unless you're part of it. That's why I always say that West Virginia is so successful when they get recruits to visit on campus. If they don't visit, there's no chance because there's just either ignorance about the state of just not knowing truly what it's all about, or just negative recruiting out there against West Virginia that they're turned off, for one of many countless reasons and don't even want to give us a chance. But once you get into it, and once you understand the culture, the history, and how you'll have so many people who have your back no matter what, that's what they hold on to. And I love and I appreciate it out of people who will go and defend. I'm not going to be like a guy like Dan Dockich out there who demeans West Virginia fans and the program and stuff like that. But listening to his take, while I totally disagreed and did not like at all the crass nature and just the personality and what he said about West Virginia University and the fans and all that in his take after Darian DeVries left. But I will agree that it is extremely hard that West Virginia can only do so much to keep around top talent in terms of coaches and players unless it gets into the SEC. Because the Big Ten ain't happening. Big Ten ain't happening for a few reasons that I don't think we necessarily need to go down that rabbit hole for this video tonight. But if West Virginia could, if the SEC decides to expand, and that is the magic question in 2030, 2031, when super conferences form, that the SEC takes the whole southern section, cut the country in half, and takes up all of the top properties in the southern states, and the Big Ten takes all of the northern states over from New Jersey all the way across to Southern California, if you want to call that north. And that's going to be the Power 2 conferences owned by Fox and ESPN, and they're going to own it, these universities that have a commitment to football and basketball, and then kind of an outlier is third because they want programs to be respectable and competitive. But if you're a top program like Notre Dame, in the terms of TV TV broadcasting companies who wants the Big Ten, Fox I'm sure would love to, would have Notre Dame in a heartbeat if it didn't even have a basketball program, if it didn't have a baseball program, but just you had Notre Dame football. But then what's going to happen after that? So the SEC, Big Ten teams are going to have programs who compete against each other at the top, highest level, have the highest commitment and financial dollars for the rev share, healthy NIL, what that evolution of what the House settlement comes to eventually, and then want to compete at the highest level across those three sports, but predominantly football and basketball. And it'll be everything's kosher. And then you're going to see a whole other kind of, I think, regional second tier. How many conferences that makes up? Big 12, ACC, Big East in basketball, or Mountain West, Pac-12, whatever you want to call it, in football. And that's where I think things might get a little bit creative, as Brett Yormark, Big 12 commissioner, has alluded to in the past, of potentially getting to a point where football dollars or a TV contract with conferences are split between football and basketball, in which you might have a program that's one conference for football and one conference for basketball, or another conference in baseball, kind of mix and match between the two. And that's going to kind of make up your second cut of programs, which might be some up and coming programs who are currently in the G6 or G5, whatever you want to call it, and a team like Memphis, who's just knocking on the door of trying to be uberly competitive in football, investing in their stadium, have that now NIL deal with FedEx. They're obviously a program that's extremely competitive in basketball, always have, want to make a name for themselves and get up into that upper tier league. And that if you're a program like West Virginia, that you want to be on the higher side of being a winning program that the SEC conference wants to respect. I think making the move by cutting Neil Brown was the first step in football. I know this video is kind of divulged from talking about Ross Hodge, but I think this is a watershed moment here that we need to talk about and take it out of, see the forest for the trees here in this hire of Ross Hodge. And that going back to Rich Rodriguez, with the NIL commitment that now will be committed by guys like Pat McAfee, Ken Kendrick, and then also other boosters who want to jump on the bandwagon for football, bringing him in, hoping that he can reignite magic in a bottle twice. And then Ross Hodge being a guy who can do more with less in the transfer portal, in JUCO recruiting, because he's been there before. But so I want to also see what he can do at high school recruiting. If you give this guy, who might be a wizard in his own right, look at the way, I know I talked about McCaslin a lot earlier and what he's been able to do already in just year 2 at Texas Tech, bringing them up to the Sweet 16. For me, they're a Final Four team. That's picking my brackets. I put Texas Tech all the way to the top 4, having the Conference Player of the Year. I know that was highly debated still, though, in JT Toppin. But that looks like a very complete team to me. So, but in Kansas, look what happened when Andy Kotelnicki left. And how Kansas kind of came back to earth. What did that have to say about Lance Leipold? Now, McCaslin hasn't obviously had that kind of way in the way Leipold had, losing Andy Kotelnicki, but was it more so Kotelnicki being the master of the things behind the scenes offensively, then more so Leipold as the head coach? Can Hodge do that same kind of thing at West Virginia? So I think Wren Baker is going to now have to politic. And same with Ross Hodge. I think the best thing that he can do in this initial press conference and moving forward, ingratiate himself to the fans, ask for Mountaineer Nation to, give him a chance, and hopefully Mountaineer Nation is patient enough, even more so than what I think that West Virginia was fans were going to afford for Darian DeVries. But I don't know if, you're going to find a Javon Small twice in 2 years. If so, that's awesome. Love it. Going to talk about that a lot as part of the whole context of this story, looking ahead to next year. But that's, I feel like, asking for a lot. So expecting a Ross Hodge next year to go out there and beat a Gonzaga, and then beat a Iowa State, beat Kansas at Fog Allen Fieldhouse. All those big three things, win 50% of your games in the Big 12 Conference. Have a player who's right on the precipice of winning Conference Player of the Year. All the things that DeVries did in his first year, if that doesn't come along, and it's more of like a 17-14, win 40% of your games, don't make the NCAA tournament in your first year, but then boom, in 2026 to 27, West Virginia is a team that challenges right up there in that upper, like, top quarter of the Big 12, maybe top third. Like, okay, and then you're competing for conference championships. So I'm willing to roll the ball here with Wren Baker. Made a great hire, I felt like, in Darian DeVries, even though DeVries fleeced West Virginia and kind of holding, his having a poker face, holding his cards close to the vest and feeling as if, all along he always destined this job in Indiana, and then ultimately taking it after just one season. So really the perfect storm, I feel like, happened for West Virginia, but that I'm willing to trust Wren Baker in making this decision to go to Ross Hodge. Hopefully he's able to use some of these kind of like chip on his shoulder early beginnings at the JUCO level for 20 and assistantships, then getting a head coach, and now he's able to get up here to the Power 4 level, show that he has the chops to be able to coach and go out there and get talent. I just think it's going to be very hard in today's world and landscape with you always have these two behemoths over your shoulder in the Big Ten, in the SEC, and the way that the structure and the rules are with NIL and the transfer portal, that teams are going to try and pluck your best player at any given time. We saw this previously because they have the money to go out there and do so. So I think this is, an uphill battle to climb for Ross Hodge that I hope we Mountaineer fans will support him financially and just, emotionally too, be here for him and for the program and support, and that the best things, possible happen truly outcome-wise, wins and losses, the way things, it seems like, whether fairly or unfairly, are judged at the end of the day for the season, for any type of season, or half decade or decades, you got to go out there and win games and find ways to be able to do so. And a lot of the times now, look how many players are in the transfer portal with players' seasons already going on. Over, 1,100 players in there in the first 48 hours of the transfer portal opening. We have unlimited free agency, and if whether fairly or unfairly, a lot of players are in there trying to move up a grade. If you're coming from a program like locally, Robert Morris here in Pittsburgh, and you make the NCAA tournament, and your best players then just going to walk after the season, try and get paid, find somewhere else to go out there and do so, then West Virginia has to go down to some of these lower levels, recreate their roster just like DeVries did this past season, and go out there, and that's how you're going to build. Whether you can retain them and keep top talent for years on end, how they do in high school recruiting, that's for a different conversation for a different time, and I've already talked about the challenges that'll be. But love to know your thoughts, good, bad, or indifferent. Love to hear your thoughts on my analysis of this whole situation. Do you think I'm kind of in crazy land? Do you think I'm kind of spot on? How excited, like I said at the opening of this video, are you feeling about the Hodge hire? Some of the thoughts that I've had on some of the others who have made comments, on YouTube and stuff like this about this, the hire, the coaching search situation, everything in abound. How you feeling about West Virginia as a program? I know it's hard right now. It's hard as a Mountaineer fan to try and see like the silver linings from the tumultuous season that we had from football to having to recreate the most new additions to the football team. I saw this graphic earlier today on social media of any program in college football. West Virginia is bringing in more players, and if you've listened to Rich Rodriguez during this spring practice season, more will be coming. More players are headed out the door, more players coming in the door. Now with this basketball team, everybody who contributed to the 2024-25 team into the transfer portal lost all three of its high school commitments to decommit, and now you have to redo it all over again. So it is just madness. I don't know why, why of all teams does the toughest battle have to be given to West Virginia? And like I said in my last week, you got my thoughts if you go and watch that video of why I unfortunately think that is. But all we can do is look on the bright side, as we always do. Look for better days ahead. Thankful that this baseball team is in a pretty good place despite losing 2 of 3 from the baseball team last weekend against Arizona, but following that up with a shut-up win over the blundering turd down there in Marshall. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll have more. I don't know if there's anything that I want to talk about from the press conference itself, and maybe we'll come back in a month or so to talk about basketball, how West Virginia is doing with any sort of possible retention, coaches, players, recruiting. I don't know when might be the right time for that, but I'll try and time that with what's going on in the news to kind of talk about that. But then we are going to talk about football. And I did kick around some ideas that I wanted to talk about for additional revenue opportunities for the athletic department, university as a whole, that it could potentially pursue when West Virginia is looking up. And, and the whole Big 12, whole ACC is looking at these teams with the House settlement coming down of TV revenue sharing dollars at the SEC and the Big 10 to try and compete financially with them during this 5-year waiting period before the realignment, the end-all realignment, I feel like, is going to come in 2030, 2031. So thanks for tuning into my this video, everybody. Hail West Virginia. Let's go.